Tēnā koutou katoa. Ko rangi nui e tūnei, ko papa tuanoko e horanei, he mihi anō kia kingi tuheitia, te kāhui ariki, pai mārire. E nā mana, e nā reo, e nā mātā waka, tēnā koutou katoa. Ko North Sea te moana, ko Tame te awa, no Ingarangi te whenua, no Birmingham a hau. Ko Ernest Ward toku tīpuna, ko Thomas Ward toku mātua, ko Joan Ward toku whaia. Ko Victoria taku tamahini, ko Iona Rao, ko Fergus aku mokopuna. He tangata tiriti a hau, e noho ana a hau kei kirikiri roa. Ko Sally Peters toku ingawa. Nō reira, ngā mihi mahana ki a koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. I want to start with some thank yous, and thank you very much for coming this evening. I really appreciate you being here. I want to start my lecture with my thank yous. Sometimes with these professorial lectures, people end them with the thank yous. I thought I'd like to do mine at the beginning. So I wanted to start off firstly by thanking my family, especially my parents. I know they would have loved to see me make it to professor. They always believed I would and constantly encouraged me to reach high but be happy and do what I enjoyed. I want to thank my sister for constant encouragement, and a really special thanks to my wonderful daughter, Victoria, who's lived this whole journey with me, and to her husband, Mike, and my grandchildren, Iona and Fergus. Together, they provide the inspiration and the joy in my life. I want to thank my colleagues. I mentioned a few colleagues in the lecture, but it's a short lecture, so I couldn't mention everybody. So I hope that the many of you that are here tonight know how much I appreciate you, even if you don't get an individual mention. And I want to thank the teachers, the families, the children who've been part of the many projects that I've been part of, and also the funding bodies that make the work possible. So, my lecture's about transitions. There's three themes to my research. As Neil introduced you to, I've been very interested in children's thinking and their well-being, but tonight, given the framework for the lecture, the time frame, I'm focusing specifically on the transitions research. So I'm going to start by expanding on my pepiha by sharing a few of my own transitions. I'm going to invite you, as I do that, to reflect on some of the transitions that you've made. The photo there is me in the garden. If we didn't make transitions, we wouldn't have all the opportunities that life gives us. Some of those transitions are planned and some are unplanned. Some of the times they're forced, sometimes they're intrinsically motivated, and we've chosen and planned for them. I think when you reflect on your transitions, were there any that were particularly significant, either at the time when you were making them or sometimes when we reflect back? This has become a real interest for me, as you can tell, over 30 years of research, looking at different aspects of transition. So one of the interesting things I think about transitions is that they provide both the times of both crisis and opportunity in lives that are always in the process of becoming. So just to start with some of my own, in the pepiha I mentioned a few important places. I was born in Birmingham. I recognise North Sea as Te Moana, but the black and white photo is Spaghetti Junction. That was being built while I was a child. The River Tame flows through there. I used to always recognise the Thames as my river, but discovered the Tame when I looked more closely into it, and it's often called, apparently, the Forgotten River, so I felt a little bit better that I had forgotten it until more recently when I was exploring my pepiha. I'm the little ship in the middle I'm going to talk about a bit more in a minute. I was in the Merchant Navy as my first job and was really fortunate to travel to lots of countries that I wouldn't otherwise have had the opportunity to do so. When I got married, I moved to Edinburgh, and Victoria was born in Edinburgh. And then we came here, thanks to Huntly Power Station. They were looking for engineers, and my husband was recruited to come to Huntly Power Station. And we've really loved being in New Zealand. So for over 30 years, we came on a 3-year contract, and I've been here ever since. Just quickly to mention some family transitions, the photo of my my parents' wedding, and I've circled my grandparents. One grandfather's behind Mum. He passed away before I was born, but the transitions really for the family, my sister and I are the photo below. My parents had been married 18 years before they had me, so I think I was probably a bit of a transition for the whole family, my sister and my parents. Next to that is me and my husband with Victoria. I was a young mum. We had Victoria in the first year of marriage, so a very different experience. We were lucky enough to have 4 generations of women at one time in our lives, and the photo there is my granddaughter Victoria, Iona, with Victoria, myself and my mum. And now we have Fergus, and the photo above is my lovely family at the moment. So many transitions that we make to parenthood, as a sibling, to a new arrival, to marriage, to losing parents, to losing loved ones. And then for career transitions. Mine's not been the obvious journey, I think. I started off, as I said, in the Merchant Navy. I found this, when my dad died, he'd kept the little newspaper article about me going to sea. So there's many possible selves and many journeys we could take, and my one brought me to academia. So I attended an all-girls grammar school, and the Merchant Navy was certainly not something my headmistress thought was a good idea, but I loved maths and science. I'd planned to be an engineer, and then an advert for BP caught my eye, and I had the opportunity to go to a recruiting night where they talked about the possibilities for a career at sea as either an engineer, a navigator, or a radio officer. My father, who came with me, said, "Oh, can we go now?" And I was like, "No, I need to go to the front and find out more about this." So I was accepted. I'm very fortunate. But looking back, some of those possible selves that we think are open to us are constrained by society. That possible self for me only came about because of change in legislation just before I left school that allowed girls to go into that career. So that legislation opened up lots of careers that previously had been prevented. So I'm very conscious of time, so I'm going to move quite quickly through the next bit. I loved sailing around the world and studying at South Shields Marine and Technical College. Being on the ship, I think, has been really useful training for everything I've done since, particularly running a school. On the ships, everyone's role was important, everyone was necessary. It didn't matter what you did, all of those jobs had to intersect with each other. Also, you had to be very resilient. There was no internet, no phone in those days. Once you sailed, that was it. If something broke, you had to fix it. If there was a problem, you had to sort it out. And so that stayed with me, I think, through all the jobs I've done. But then as a new mum, once I got married, that career was no longer possible. So the thought was what to do next. My first step was becoming a family daycare provider while my daughter was small, because my husband was still away at sea. I was really fortunate they provided a 1-year training course to become a home-based educator. And that's when my fascination with child development began. And then that continued through some Open University papers. But then after a few years of doing that, the BP's fleet downsized, my husband came ashore, went to university, and I had to go out and earn much-needed income. So I did a variety of things, mostly in retail. I won't go into all the details of the other things, but tried lots of different things. And then for pleasure, I carried on studying physics and maths at night class, which was my little bit of a treat for me because I was having to do jobs that were not so exciting. And then in 1985, my husband was recruited to come here, so the next big transition for us was moving to New Zealand. And when I came here, it was the opportunity for me to rethink a career option. And that's when I chose teaching. So that interest in child development was still sitting there, and so I enrolled in what was then Hamilton Teachers College. And we were really fortunate to have Margaret Carr and Helen May as our lecturers, who both went on to be professors. I put Victoria University on this slide because it was a bit tricky where to fit it in later, but my first full job, which actually came a bit later than this, as a lecturer was at Victoria University, and Helen was leading the Institute for Early Childhood Studies. Helen was instrumental in lighting my fire for research. So one of the first pieces of research I did as a teacher was exploring the block corner and why children were not using it in the way that I hoped. And that piece of research led me to move the furniture, change the resources, and do things differently. So I already had this interest in research, and then the opportunity, we were at Hamilton Teachers College at those days, we said to come down the hill and finish your degree at university, at the University of Waikato. While I was doing that, my passions and my pathways came together in a very exciting way for me. So when I enrolled as an early childhood student, I chose mathematics as my option subject, to the confusion and consternation of some. Why was an early childhood teacher studying mathematics at university level? But I persisted with it because, as I've said before, that was one of the things I really enjoyed. And then a job arose as a researcher on an early childhood mathematics project. And so I applied with enthusiasm and was very fortunate that Jenny gave me the job. So that brought my interests together, and for many years now, that research just built on to different areas of understanding children's mathematics, and lots of opportunities to work with ministry on different resources and so on from there. But what I want to acknowledge here, and this lecture is about your journey and what's influenced you on the way, was Jenny mentored me into a world I didn't know existed. She taught me the skills of running a big project, took me to conferences, introduced me to people, gave me the confidence to introduce myself to people, showed me about publishing, and encouraged me to pursue Masters and PhD once I'd finished my degree. She also encouraged me to stick with the challenge of juggling part-time fixed-term contracts around research and teaching and all the things we do when you're trying to start an academic career, while at the same time you've got mortgage demands and other things that might lead you into a different job. That persistence paid off, and as research assistant and then project officer, we worked really hard on trialling different things that made a difference to children. And as I've already mentioned, the ministry picked up on many of those things. In my master's, I carried on studying some of those ideas that we'd worked on in the ministry projects. Would they work as an independent person just in the classroom by themselves without ministry funding? And I explored that also with 7-year-olds. I thought my PhD would continue the maths theme. That seemed to be where I was going and what I knew most about. A school accepted me in to do this research. I was really interested in the what happens next, the connection between the learning in ECE, which we'd done a lot of work on, and what happens at school, which we'd also done a lot of work on. But how were children navigating that move? When I got into the school, I realised that many people were more interested in other aspects of the transition. The person with the passion for maths was me, and I could carry on with that theme, or I could rewrite the proposal and look at something different. So that's what I did. I decided to follow children from the last year in kindergarten as their families were deciding what school to go to, follow that pathway, follow them into school, and explore the experiences of both the parents, the teachers, the children in that move through from ECE to school. So my PhD I called Crossing the Borders. It took me into this in-depth look at children's learning journeys. Those of you familiar with Bronfenbrenner will probably get the sense of proximal processes going on there. The zigzag is the child's journey, representing the child's journey, with those immediate interactions of child and environment, and the bigger arrows are meant to represent those things that happen around the child that they're not directly involved in, but shapes their journey. And then the weaving or the whāriki in the background is just saying there's so many other influences. However in-depth our study, we never quite capture them all. So the findings of that study really led to me arguing that children's learning journey could be supported if we understood what was happening for them. At the time, the ministry was moving to a seamless education, and I thought that might sound good in practice, but my research was showing that children expected school to be a bit different. they could cope with change, providing they had the right information and support. And I found that listening to children was key. For one child, they might be a bit scared to use the school toilets, and that could really impact on their day. For other children, they might be unhappy because of what happened in the playground. Others were really happy to be at school, and what was it about school they were enjoying? So I became really fascinated in the many different theoretical ways we could understand this transition, along with the practical information I was gaining. I can't go into all those theories here, but they are a source of delight. I use them a lot with my master's students, and I remember one student saying, "Oh, it's so complex, but it's beautiful." It's kind of what I still feel, but I just wanted to touch on one because I'll come back to it later. So Van Gennep was writing many years ago, but he wrote about transitions as being on a threshold, that we could think about ourselves on a limon or a door, the threshold of a doorway, between what was the old and what's going to be the new. And at the moment of transition, we're neither part of the old or yet part of the new. And so what is it that actually helps us to become incorporated into the new? Some people are saying it's more like a corridor than an immediate threshold, that transitions can take time. And we know that special rites of passage can sometimes help with the transition. We have ceremonies like marriages and so on that can sometimes help with the transition. So all this thinking and all this studying led into, I forgot I'd drawn that one for you, so that's just what I was saying. One of the things that's really important for transitions is just the physical move, like a child moving to school, doesn't mean they've yet reincorporated into the new role. And I watch children who could be quietly disengaged, not yet there, not yet participating fully. The children who cry or complain, we notice more, but I was very interested in those children that we need to offer that bit more support to. So those recommendations that I made led to invitations by the ministry to come and discuss this. And from there, Margaret Carr and I were fortunate to have 2 opportunities to do research projects looking at the links between Te Whāriki and the New Zealand curriculum. And at the time, the OECD notion of key competencies was shaping ideas around what we should be doing in schools. Education for the 21st century, it was talked about. So it was really exciting to explore with teachers what this might mean in practice, what were the key competencies, what did they mean. They aligned quite nicely with the learning disposition work that Margaret had been doing in ECE, and it led to changes or thinking about changes to pedagogy and assessment and thinking about how the curriculum documents could align. The little one on the side was an opportunity to go to Australia take a group of early childhood and school teachers on a minibus around some settings in Australia that Professor Sue Dockett had organised for us. What I found from that one was actually to get the best conversations about ECE and school is to spend some time sitting together in a minibus driving around Australia. So I just thought that one was too good. Anyway, we were then part of the ministry group talking about the New Zealand curriculum, and we're excited to get this alignment between the strands of Te Whāriki and the key competencies at school. Am I right? So that drawing, many of you will be familiar with, is from the school curriculum document. However, in practice, once that was out there and I was working with teachers, this is my own drawing of it, is we had Te Whāriki and we had the New Zealand curriculum. But that alignment took a lot of work for teachers. It wasn't a natural progression from those strands of Te Whāriki into the key competencies at school. So I drew what I've called the potential bridge between them. It provided a potential bridge, but it needed both sides to work at actually making it happen. At the same time, Mangere Bridge were building on the work I'd done with my thesis, which, as you'll remember, was called Crossing the Border, and they did an in-depth look at their own practices and working with their local schools. There's too many findings to share, all of them here, but 2 significant ones were the use of the early childhood portfolio at school. So children taking their early childhood portfolio to school as a way for the new entrant teacher to get to know them. And the second one that's had a lasting impact was buddies from the school coming down to the early childhood centre to work with a preschool buddy. That was very effective. The buddies had to put in CVs and apply and actually be matched with a child, a 4-year-old child. They would come down, they would plan activities together, and then when it was time to go to school, that school child, sometimes in one school it was a year 4 and another school it was a year 5, would show the family around the school. The families loved the child's eye view of the school. And this really supported the young children, the 4-year-olds starting school, having a big buddy that they knew they could call on. That book there, the teachers were the co-authors, and it was a beginning for me of writing with teachers. Another significant piece of work, and still my most cited one, was a literature review that I did for the Ministry of Education. They were interested in what makes a successful transition. And the review of the research, at that time there was sort of a sense certain groups might be more or less successful at school. But the research was really showing that it really depends on their characteristics and what the school context is offering. So for any child, they could have a successful or less successful transition. The key findings and themes from that have been used extensively, and also for other transitions. I was told when the Christchurch earthquakes happened, in the absence of other literature, teachers were using these themes to think about supporting children as they manage those earthquake transitions. Another significant event for me was the opportunity to go to Australia. The invitation was for us to write chapters for the book that I've shown there. And while we were there, we worked together on a position statement about transitions. The 5 professors that are in the image were very important because they were planning to do some international research. I was only a senior lecturer at the time, but I was very fortunate they took me under their wing and thought that I could potentially lead the New Zealand arm for this. And I want to particularly acknowledge Wendy Dunlop, who was one of those professors. She's been a friend. I had met her at conferences in the 2000s, actually. She was there through those rough patches of the PhD when you wonder why you're doing it at all. And she was encouraging and saying, this is really good, you need to keep going. We'd done some writing. And then when this opportunity came up for a Māori Curie project, we actually all stayed in her house. But the Icelandic professor didn't stay, but the others of us, we stayed in her house and wrote this proposal, day and night, until we got it done. While I was there, I'd been doing some research here with Vanessa Paki, and I was emailing and I think just emailing in those days, back to Vanessa going, do you think we could do this together? Because we really wanted to offer an Indigenous research focus for part of the New Zealand arm of this project. The first year we put it in, it wasn't successful, but we got feedback, and then the second time it was successful. And it didn't support the New Zealand team, but because there was Māori Curie funding for the Europeans, we were able to get Royal Society funding to fund us. So those are the universities that were involved. It was 4 years. It involved work packages in each of the countries, each with its own theme and focus, which you might not be able to read from a distance, but you can see the inter-overlapping ideas and where we went for each theme. So part of it was about strengthening the long-term cooperation with Europe. So there was the finding of the research, but also getting to know each place. And the requirement was that you spent time at the other universities, not just a fly-in, fly-out like we do for conferences. So that chance to work and live in another space was also really important for my own research and my own thinking. And we hosted here twice. The Indigenous Approaches work package, we ran an Indigenous conference as part of that. We had the visitors here for up to a month, but a very successful Indigenous conference with, I think, every Māori academic in our division at the time was part of that, and we had guest speakers from elsewhere. And then the second one was on transition journeys, where we looked particularly at longitudinal studies. So it helped put us on the map. showcase the research that was happening here, which we were taking out to the other countries, but I think having more people involved when we were here was really important. We had a writing retreat for 2 days over at Raglan, and that was the foundation of one of the books that has come out of the Poet Project. And at the same time, there was further research going on with teachers, thinking particularly about curriculum and pedagogy here in New Zealand. So I'm just going to skim through. I'm not going to go into detail about these, but there are a number of projects we were fortunate enough to be part of. Karen Davis was another research partner, and she and I looked particularly at the children's thinking. One of the things that came out of that, which was very much about children's thinking in ECE, was it was only serendipitous when sometimes a new entrant teacher picked up on the ideas we knew children were passionate about. So it led us to thinking, how could we make that a more consistent experience for children? Then the Learning Journeys project, which I was working on with Vanessa, and I was fortunate to be part of Margie Hohepa's work looking at Kohanga Te Kura, and then more recently a teacher-led innovation fund working with Dannevirke, where the new entrant teachers and ECE teachers in Dannevirke put in a project that involved every school and every ECE setting in Dannevirke. They were originally told that's too big for a teacher-led innovation fund, and they said, well, that's fine, we'll do it anyway, and we got the funding regardless, and kept it with that very large project, and it was fabulous. So, some key findings. I don't think I'm going to read them all out to you. You can probably be scanning down those. But I think one of the things was really ECE centres taking a lot more responsibility for that transition. Sometimes in the past we'd found teachers would say, oh, I think it's going to be difficult. But okay, so what can we do about that? How can we help support children? The schools became much more nuanced in their focus and what they would do to support children. A lot more learning about children's interests and competencies. We had one Māori medium setting going into an English medium school as part of that project. And one of the things that was really helpful for those children was those ECE teachers doing a cultural audit of the resources. So there were familiar books and puzzles and things when you got to school. And teachers developing cultural knowledge and language skills. With all of that research, I was fortunate to be part of the writing team for Te Whāriki and be able to put that into the curriculum. The new, well, not so new now, but the new Te Whāriki had this image saying where the two parts of the book meet, you can see the whāriki is unfinished, with the loose strands still to be woven in. And this acknowledges the child's potential and their ongoing educational journey. So for me, that was a very exciting change. It might not be so exciting to you, but it was really exciting to me because it was recognising that the new learning could be woven onto Te Whāriki. We didn't need a bridge. We didn't need to align. You took what the child already knew from ECE and you wove on the school learning. And so there's a section in there where there's a different weaving pattern for Te Whāriki in the 2017 version that symbolises the start of a journey that takes you beyond the horizon. Each of the principles links to the NZC, and the pathways section, which I took the major responsibility for, shows that continuity from school to kura, offering a place to start. It doesn't say it does everything, but it's inviting teachers in both sectors in to be thinking about how those connect. The other thing that does was recognise the learning journey as part of everybody's responsibility. It's neither just the ECE teacher or the primary school teacher, it's everybody's responsibility. And for the first time, we had lots of Te Whāriki resources online, and that's just the one to do with pathways and transitions, but there were many more resources put online for teachers. Currently, I'm part of, as Neil said, the Curriculum Voices project, which is considering and providing advice to the ministry on all the changes that are going through with the curriculum refresh or somewhat more perhaps development. And my role particularly is considering the ECE objectives and the perspectives and how they're going to connect to the school curriculum. So transitions again. You know, we're going to have to see what the new Te Mātai Aho looks like before we can see how we make those links. There's much more consistency in how children are viewed, and some of the goals, I think, for teachers are more similar. So I just wanted to move towards the end of this with a reflection. I think individuals, families, institutions, societies, they all experience transition. It's happening to all of us, and it's all around us. Often those liminal situations are transitory and temporary, and a lot of my work's been focused on how to support people to move through this. A lot of what I've done with children I've found is absolutely applicable for our students coming to university. Some of the ideas about how we support people to make a transition go across sectors and settings. But what if we can't complete the transition? Lots of aspects of daily life are full of change. There's been writing about something called a liminal hotspot, where you're stuck in the liminal space and you can't actually move from that to make the transition into the new experience, the sense of being trapped. One writer writes about it as your foot's on the pedal but you're not in gear, so people can burn out with that as well. So I think that's a fruitful area for consideration and new research. I want to just take a moment to acknowledge and thank the many students I've worked with over the years. Not all of them have studied transitions, but some of those titles on there give you the flavour of some who have. PhD students and master's students. And on my master's papers, students have taken studies of other transitions, like to retirement or the loss of a partner. I had a fabulous person one year from the Solomons who was looking at how you have to go off on a boat to secondary school and what that might mean. Very different to an experience here in the city. And just finally, we're very excited to nearly have Bloomsbury Handbook of Early Childhood Transitions published. We're told early next year. This is a second book to come out of the Poet Project. It builds on and expands from Poet, but there's many of the core writers that were part of the original Poet team from those countries, and we've been fortunate to add in North American perspectives as well with one of the editors and also some of the authors. So it's very exciting. We're really pleased to be able to think about what next for transitions research. So we've used Robert Frost's famous poem there. It circled me right back in my learning journey back to school because I really liked Robert Frost when I was at school. And his poem that posits that the small choices we make every day can have big impacts on our lives. The decisions we make set us on a path we might not understand the importance of until much later, and I've shared with you some of the transitions I've made. In this book, we've taken the Frost poem, The Road Not Taken, to reflect on research journeys in the field of early years transitions. So many of the authors have done what we do when we set out on a project. They've explained the decisions they make, the road that they chose and why they chose it and what kinds of results that led to. But in some of the other chapters of the book, we're looking to the future. We think this research area itself is at a crossroads with multiple possible paths to travel. When I was doing my PhD, nobody was looking at transitions to school in New Zealand. Then suddenly quite a few people were. And I was thinking, is that going to be something that's too late? But actually, it was the beginning of a journey that's just grown and grown. So in the book, we think about how we might make change with all of this research. Also thinking about change in the way that we understand transitions, change in the way that we design and frame and carry out research, and change in the ways that our research can benefit society. So as part of this project, we're really daring to dream about the next steps. So I want to thank you very much. Thank you very much for coming tonight. Thank you for sharing my journey. Ngā mihi nui ki a koutou.
Kia ora koutou. Thank you all for coming once again, but thank you particularly to Sally for a fantastic talk. Lovely to see pictures of you growing up. I could have watched those for a couple of hours. They were great. And fantastic to hear about what is an impressive body of work over a number of years. I did calculate the number of years since you were a student at Waikato, but I'm too polite to mention that number. But it is a long-standing well, to be congratulated level of service and engagement with this wonderful university. I've got a few words to say to round off the evening, and I will really keep brief my comments on the work that you've done. I'm, as you know, a psychologist, but I have dabbled sometimes in work in educational psychology. Pro-Vice Chancellor for Arts Law, Psychology and Social Sciences at the moment. Acting Pro-Vice Chancellor for Education. I think I'm in my own liminal hotspot at the moment in terms of that transition. Whether when I leave the corridor, I'll tell you. This is going to conclude the formal part of the evening. And I just want to let you know that there will be an opportunity to ask Sally questions, but you are banned from doing it in here. You have to accost her at the bar outside. That's the rules. I don't make them. Look, I think my impression hearing you talk, it just takes you back, and I'm sure it takes everybody here back to all those times when we've experienced transitions, or when we've seen the people we love, our children and others, face transitions. And one of the most stressful things you can do in your life is to move house. That's a different type of transition. And just imagine, just thinking back to my own children and myself, the stress as a parent of seeing your first child go first to kindergarten and then to school and then to secondary school. Transitions are hugely important. They're associated with academic outcomes, but also we know mental health outcomes, and I think it would be particularly pertinent to look at that in the higher education context, given what we know about the data there. I see them as all of the things you've described. Just to give us some of my own thoughts, I see them also as threats, opportunities and challenges in terms of identity. You're faced with a new context. It's about finding out who you are and how you fit in with other people. So I think transitions are something that are going to be increasingly important in education, but actually across psychology, as we look at transitions across the lifespan. So what an exciting time to be studying that, to be understanding it and feeding into those new discussions that are fundamentally important to who we are, how we feel, and where we're going. I want to finally as well, rather than keep you any longer, thank Sally for her contribution, for her presentation. I've known Sally since I've been here, but only more closely since, about 3 weeks, isn't it? 4 weeks since coming over to education. She's a wonderful colleague, a wonderful person to work with, intelligent, compassionate, and an excellent leader as well. I thank you again for coming. I thank all of you for joining us. I'll leave it to Sally to let you know whether she's happy or not to answer your questions. That is her prerogative, having given the presentation. But please may I ask you to join me in applauding once again a fantastic contribution and achievement. Thank you, Sally. Thank you very much.